I'm going to look specifically, Enrique looked at digital strategy as a whole for an organization. I'm going to start zeroing in a little bit on the strategy for communications. I think it answers some of the questions that were just raised about content, message, channel and format online. Firstly, let's just have a look. In a digital era, what are some of the challenges? What I call it digital disruption. It's a common term for what digital is doing to change the world, and how is it affecting think tanks, and particularly communications in think tanks? Well, natural territories for influence are changing. We have a representative here of an American think tank that works very closely in Europe, and has actually set up a European arm. The territories that ODI used to sort of see as its territories are now being encroached on by various other actors that can connect. Equally speaking, ODI probably encroaches on lots of other international audiences and channels. So natural territories for influence change. The forms of content change. So we're moving from publications to people being able to access written content on iPads with video and multimedia and so on. The social media has moved the web from a static one-way communications format to something that it allows interaction, connections to be made, and for other people to choose the kind of content that you see because they are your friends or your colleagues or they're in some way connected to you. And finally, it's very hard to define what the media is. You've got the old broadcast media, BBC, your CNN, your big broadcast media. Actually, a lot of the news now comes from the blogosphere and the Twitterati. So the media, what does media mean anymore in a digital age? Those are four big challenges for think tanks that are used to communicating in certain ways and have historical strengths in each of those particular ways. There's also some particular challenges about digital and technology for think tanks. Technology changes constantly, and how do you keep up with ever-changing technologies? How can you make sure that, this is called the pyramid of online communications methods, how do you make sure that you can move to the top of that pyramid when all of the components of the pyramid are constantly changing? And so a website presence is not the same now as it was 10 years ago, and it's not the same as it will be in a few years' time. But you need it in place to be able to effectively do everything else. How do you measure the success of communications, of research communications? There's so many different ways to measure and so many different tools you're using, it's very hard to keep up. How do you get into the hands of the people that need it? So in some places, there's lots of content producers, and so you've got a lot of competition. In other places, there are fewer competitors, but also fewer users. So making sure that you have strategies, depending on where your audience are, for getting into the hands of the people that need it. Maybe in Africa they're not online. Maybe in the north they've got so much information coming at them daily that they're not going to read your stuff. Finally, second to last, complex messages. Think tanks work in complex messages, yet the web works in simple 140-character tweets or single-page long web documents. So how do you use digital to help your research stand out from the crowd? And in 2001, there were 109.5 billion documents online. That was 2001. I don't even know what the number is now, but you can imagine that standing out in that crowd is incredibly difficult. Now, I suggest three specific planks to doing this, three approaches that think tanks can use to try and make the most of the digital world. The first one I call being their communications, and it's the idea that you have to be heard to be found. Now, historically, if you wanted to reach a policymaker, you would probably try maybe to place an article or an item on the radio show that they listen to. Maybe. It would be a good way. You know that this radio show is very much listened to. What happened when the web came on? Everyone made their own websites. Everyone thought, they're going to come to my website because they're so interested in what I do. Well, actually, that doesn't hold water. Making your own website does not mean people visit it. You still have to do the old things of trying to get into their streams of information. You still have to reach them, and they're not going to come back to you unless you've reached them first. It doesn't matter how well you place on Google. If no one searches you, you're never going to be found. If no one knows your name, they're never going to click that link. And actually, Google is now prioritizing social media. So your friends, the people that you're connected to and your organization are connected to, influences where you place in Google. So if you have a connection to someone and they do a search, they are more likely to see you towards the top in Google. If they have never heard of you and have never connected to you, they will never see you in Google. So it's very important that you are being heard before you're to be found. And there's some tools for this. Now, I've got 4 of the biggest areas here. The biggest being their tool is email. Everyone reads email. Everyone gets emails and looks at their emails. Yes, there may be too many of them. Yes, mailing lists may scare the people by the amount of emails they receive in a day. However, people do give emails more time than they give lots of other communication channels. And more importantly, when they read an email, they are in a doing frame of mind. They are there to do something, to see something, to learn something, to read something, to reply to something. They're in a doing frame of mind. It's not passive, it's an active act. So email, key channel. Blogs. Now, blogs are very good being their tools if you go to the blogs that people read. Don't create your own blog. Find the blogs that the people you want to contact are reading, and place articles if you can. If you can't place articles, place comments on other people's articles. So go there. Don't expect people to come to your new blog. Go to the blogs that are already the industry leaders. If there is a niche that no one has written a blog about, then create a blog, then make it make it the red place. The media and blogs, as I said in the first one, they're often the same thing. So you can often place things in the media. However, there's also other aspects of the media. There's obviously the TV content, the radio content. All of that is now available and delivered digitally too. So don't forget the old media. That's still important, but the barrier between that and blogs is very, very, very porous, and lots of media, for example, now have blogs, so don't forget the media. And finally, social networks. When people go to a social network, they are seeing a stream of information of the people that they want to follow. So you are reaching them rather than them having to come to your website. They should never have to come to your website to hear your news. They should be able to access it in the way that they like to access news. And all these 4 are ways that people like to access news. That's being there. In this presentation, there's lots more detail. You will have the link. You can click in and see specific tools on each one. You can see more information. You can see videos and everything. But I'm just doing a very high-level version. Okay, that was point 1. Point 2 of how you can take advantage of digital is how you organize content and messaging. The nature of content has changed with the advent of the internet. Before, you had a publication that was potentially at the end of a research project. You released a publication. That was the point of the project. The publication maybe sat on a shelf for a few years, was in a library, was in a journal, was read for a few years, and then probably was forgotten, unless it was an incredibly seminal piece of work. Now, you can communicate using digital means, using blogs and so on. From the second that you start a research project, Nancy was talking about this morning, you can start communicating, you can start creating networks, you can start emailing people who are going to be interested in your research outputs. You can start creating mailing lists, maybe publishing early research blogs to get people interested and prepared to be your champions. Then you have the life. That's a cradle. Then you have the life. You burst into color with a publication, a multimedia output, a tweet, all sorts of channels you can put your messages out in. And we were talking about this morning in strategic communications, but essentially you use more channels to try and reach more audiences and try and do things wider. And there's ways in which, through the tools that you'll see inside here, if you go into the presentation, things like Wikipedia, like sector resource libraries, like digital editions, so you can feed a PDF into a tool called Issue, and it will create a little magazine version that people can flick through. All sorts of little tools that you can use to make the publication, the life of the research, much stronger. Finally, nothing dies. The grave doesn't exist online. All things become grey, and you can do things to try and make sure that your research has a long life and actually can continue having impact for many years to come. People will continue accessing it. So what can you do to plan for that? Maybe think about revisiting old research to try and capitalize on very important and useful pieces of research. So if you have success one year with one publication, do another version the next year, see what's changed. Plan series that release something every year. So try and work around the fact that the internet continues to allow old content to be accessed. And this is where, in the life, is where you have the different forms of messaging for different people. So that's where you're putting out your messages that are traditional and trusted and credible, but you may let other people put out their messages that you don't control. You can't control, but what they're doing is disseminating. Nothing you have produced says anything that you disagree with. If they say stuff that you disagree with, that's just life. All they're doing actually is creating extra impetus for people to visit and see the original source. So have more freedom about what you let other people do. Also have more freedom at the top level of an organization to an individual researcher. Allow individual researchers to put their opinions out more, whereas at the top as a think tank, you may not put out the same level of, you may not maybe advocate or even use the same level of opinion. So have different levels of opinion. Third step is much more about content and messaging, much more about content and tools, and it's the fact that lots of companies, lots of organizations are creating tools and content all over the internet, and there's lots of things that have been created that will support your work, but you don't need to invent, you don't need to recreate it. So potentially there's a whole set of things that you can take advantage of in terms of content. There's free images through Flickr that not-for-profits can use because they're released under a specific license that allows not-for-profits to use them. There's free statistics and visualization tools that gives you access to databases back to the 1950s of every single development indicator under the sun, plus lots of other indicators that you never thought were interesting or possibly aren't relevant. But they're there. There's internet archives that show you histories of what other people have released on the internet. There's things like Google Scholar that give you years of old scholarly material for free. So there's a lot of content available out there. Don't reinvent it. Don't recreate it. See what's out there first. There's also a whole load of tools out there that don't require an IT department. And this is to Enrique's point earlier. So you can use news feeds and Twitter to find your research. You can use document libraries and editors like Google Docs, or there's other ones like Zoho, and I think Microsoft's one is now online too. Survey tools, there's free survey tools. If you need to run an online survey, SurveyMonkey, SurveyGizmo, they both do free accounts. You can create a little survey, send it out, people will fill it in, no cost to you, and you've got actually a very powerful tool there at your hand. And finally, wikis, so you can create, rather than Wikipedia, you can create collaborative wikis of research, so ways in which you write maybe your research papers together with other people, both online, all online. I'll leave that. I think that's it. That was a very, very quick. All of this is in much more detail, with all the tools written up, is a set of blogs that you will have in your resource. We will send round to everyone after. So read the full blogs for the full detail.
The website that you've got this...
I forgot to say, there's one tool that you can create wicked presentations on called Prezi.
Prezi. Okay, so
P-E-R-Z-I, sorry.
So are you going to have a place where people are going to be able to post tools that they have found useful in these areas?
One thing we want to do in the clinic, the session I'm running in the clinic, is specifically about looking at tools that people are using or they might be interested in using and just trying to feed that back. But yes, we will also feed it on.
Yeah, I would love to learn what other tools people are using.
Anyone else? Anyone with anything burning to say? Oh, wait a minute.
I'm not burning, but I'm warm. Thanks very much, by the way, and I know we have one more presentation, but the thing that Enrique made a really good point, and after seeing this presentation is worth reminding ourselves of, which is that there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of shiny toys, and all of these things will derive from your own organization's communication strategy. which is what is it we're trying to achieve, who are the people that we're trying to reach, that we're really trying to reach, the decision makers. If they say yes, we pop a cork on a champagne bottle back at the office and celebrate our success. What do those people care about? How do we create messages that speak to their values? And then finally, what tools do we use to communicate those messages? And it's obvious that the tools are changing and they're becoming a lot more efficient and effective. But understanding where the tools fit in the context of a communication strategy is extremely important. And I just wanted to highlight that really, really important point that Enrique had made, which is that this strategy is what drives the things that you use.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that the particularly the being there communications idea is very much you need to know what they're using so that you choose the right tools to meet them. The other two are more about organizational capacity and organizational approach to research and messages.
While I agree with what you said, actually, there is an issue where think tanks are often criticized, and that is that they address only the ivory towers. And when IRS comes to bust you, there is nobody in the courtyard, and that happens in countries where they're in the gray zone. So in a way, if you think more broader, you think as well, what are the additional constituencies that you build behind your work product, or in a way defending you? And I have to say, think tanks have never been like that, meaning that it was not their core mission. But in a way, as we see for a lot of issues now, even politicians, there's populism that rules a lot of countries today. In a way, I'm not saying, actually, I don't like think tanks to be populist, but you have to think of what are the constituencies that will back you up. So in a way, this strategy is, yes, for changing policies, but often being transparent towards a broader audience brings you a constituency that tomorrow might back you up. And in this respect, if you compare that with traditional NGOs, in a way, think tanks are lagging behind, because some of the NGOs, it's a bit easier for them, but they've already not only used the tools, but they have mobilized parts of population to, let's call it, rally behind them. And sometimes, as I said, it has happened to think tanks that I work with, where basically when they lose out of love with the government, there is nobody else to defend them.
I'm just going to say that there are some amazing tools that sometimes, or we are early adopters, or we are in a context that anyone use it, but we think that we have to introduce it. Sometimes it takes too much time to learn, or too much time to start learning it, that we cannot use it, or we were just late. Like with Prezi, for example, the first time that I see one presentation in Prezi was incredible, it was such an amazing thing, but to make it was very difficult. And start learning alone was really difficult, and I just put aside. And right now they are all the people is trying to use it, but I don't have anyone that is trying to teach me how to use it, or where I have to have the resources to start learning. Not just with the Prezi explanation, just with the practical explanation. I think sometimes we don't have this type of collective learning that we need to surpass this problem.
Well, I would say two things to that. Firstly, I would say that there shouldn't be much better explanation of how to use Prezi than the one that Prezi create, because they're trying to help people use the tool. So I think you shouldn't, we as a think tank, the initiative or whatever, shouldn't be doing how-tos on how to use Prezi, because that's already been done by people that know how to do it better. It's, if it's not good enough, then we should feed back to them and say this is not good enough. The second thing I say is one of the advantages of digital is that people upgrade and change things without you having to upgrade or change something. So Prezi have released a very, very good PowerPoint import tool in the last few months that actually imports your PowerPoints in a way that can be used in Prezi. So they have upgraded to deal with that particular issue.
I heard from your presentation that we can use IT freely even without department of IT department. But I didn't see in your document that the risk of viruses that usually worried us. It disturbs and it even destroys all the documents. Second is cost. The biggest challenge this time is the cost attached with this IT, especially with the antivirus softwares to procure softwares. So how do you explain this?
I missed the first point, but I'll take the second. What was risk and cost? Okay. Risk of losing data. Okay. On the cost issue first, because I think that's the easier one. These are all free, or most of them are free, and for not-for-profits particularly, a lot of more things are free. So Google allows not-for-profits, particularly in Africa, to have their whole suite. Now, Google, I think, is one of the interesting examples where if you take up the whole Google suite, you probably need an IT person to do that because it's configuring it is quite hard. But lots of the other things are free and actually a lot lower cost as long as you have the internet connection to work them. On the risk, yes, there are risks. There are lots. Some tools are better than others at allowing you to take your data out. Some companies are more trustworthy than others because of various things. So you need to assess before you go and use a particular tool. You need to have a look around and see, how many people are using it. Is it what kind of backing does it have? The same kinds of things that you probably would want to know if you were making a long-term investment in any software. However, on an individual level, hopefully you're not talking about the same level. So if something did go wrong, yes, you'd have to do a bit of work. But probably nothing's going to go wrong in the next 2 or 3 years. And IT systems tend to be 2 or 3 years before they're obsolete anyway. So if something does get shut down in 2 or 3 years' time, you've had 2 or 3 years use of it. So I don't think it's the end of the world, but yes, you do need to assess it.
Last question.
It's a comment. I want to disagree slightly with Eric's comment, which is already on Twitter, that the communication strategy should guide the decision about tools. I kind of agree with that, but there's a maxim in hacker culture that you should first make it work, then make it better. And I think there's a danger that you see all these different tools and you think, oh my word, we need a huge strategy and just start doing this stuff, start playing with it. Figure out what works and what doesn't work for you, and then make it better. So you don't necessarily need to have a grand strategy to jump into this. It can seem very awe-inspiring when you see it all in one place, but actually these tools are very often quite intuitive, and you'll find what works for you and your organization and your community, and then build out from there. So my advice would be make it work, then make it better.
Yeah, I think that I think.
Direction rather than just try it.
Okay.
I think that I'll just respond to that one last. I think that this presentation is the 10th son of a presentation that happened that I created many years ago, and in that one I concentrated on little tools you could try. What I saw after that is that lots of people went off in all sorts of unorganized ways. So what I haven't given you is the full in-depth of all of the tools in this one, but the tools are there, and I completely agree. You should go in and use them, but it's useful often to have a framework, I think, to work to, and particularly the being there, I think, is quite an important one for people to take on.